Hello my friends and welcome back to another video. Today is going to be my November wrap-up. Now, November was a very bad reading month for me. I believe I read like 14 books or something like that. I read a good amount, but a lot of them were just, I would say the majority of them were just not very good. And I was in a really bad reading slump. I got sick the end of November and early December, so it's just been a time. November was not good to me, so I'm not excited to wrap up these books because I want to pretend I didn't read most of them. Here I am doing a wrap up for you all, so hopefully you enjoy my very mediocre reading month. So let's get into it because I can't keep putting it off. So first up, I had 2 DNFs this month, which is kind of crazy because I don't tend to DNF very often. I try to power through even though it kills me on the inside, but I do it anyways. So when I DNF, you know it's kind of bad. This one might make some people upset, so I'm very, very sorry in advance. But my first DNF of the month was Hex. So this is about this town called Black Spring. It has a 300-year-old curse on it. They have this witch named Catherine who has her eyes sewn shut and her mouth sewn shut, and she's wearing these chains so her arms are like shackled together, and she just like roams the town, and they have this like surveillance that they keep watch for her and like monitor her and stuff. It's very weird. Honestly, I only made it 178 pages. I did not like the writing. I don't know if it was the translation or not because this is a translated book, but oh my god, I could not handle the writing. It was so confusing and I couldn't follow along. I was bored to tears because this is a very slow story. I just didn't care about any of the characters. I was not invested in anything. I felt like it had a weird like misogynistic undertone. The author kind of like focuses a lot on boobs and nipples, and it's a very bizarre, and honestly, I just didn't care enough to keep reading till the end. I know a lot of people say that the end is like worth it, but I can't imagine an ending that would be worth it. And Justin, my partner, ended up reading it and finishing it for me. He told me how it ended, and honestly, I'm very glad I DNF'd because it probably would have been a 2-star. So, did not like this one. I know people love this book, but not for me. Not at all. Did not like it. My second DNF I was really sad about, and that is the Twiford Code by Janice Hallett. I was sent this book by Atria Books, and I was sent this one along with The Appeal, and I read The Appeal earlier this year, and I really liked it. I gave it 4.5 stars, and I was so interested in that one, and I just like really loved it that I expected to just immediately love the Twiford Code, but it is so very different than The Appeal, and honestly I hated the way it was written. It drove me insane to read, and I was not interested in this story at all. This is about like a secret code that's in this children's book, and this guy who just recently got out of prison is looking into this mystery that happened with his teacher who went missing, and she was looking into the secret code that was in these children's books. The whole thing is written in like voice messages or like voice recordings, so it's like a translated voice recording, and it was really irritating to read. Like, I did not like the way it was written at all. It did not remind me of the Appeal at all, and the story just wasn't interesting. I didn't really like the secret code thing that was going on. I wasn't invested at all. I don't even remember where I was at when I DNF'd. I think I still have the bookmark. I was on page 108, so I made it this far, but I just was not invested in this story at all, and I just couldn't keep reading it, so I DNF'd this one. Next we have Maggies Grave by David Sodergren. This was my November book club pick for my Patreon, and I don't have the best relationship with David Sodergren books. I read The Forgotten Island, I didn't love it. I read The Night Shoot and I didn't love it. And then I read Maggie's Grave and I didn't really love it. This one is also about a town that is cursed by a witch kind of vibe. It's kind of similar to Hex in that sense, but honestly, I felt like this one, and I feel like this for a lot of David Sodergren books that I've read, they just feel like a B horror movie to me, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I just don't really love them. They just seem very predictable, they're very obvious, they just seem like very generic stories, and I don't really fall in love with any part of it. This one I felt like had really good gore, and I liked the opening scene a lot. The opening scene was great, but I felt like the rest of the book didn't follow what the opening scene kind of promised when I started the book. I also read this book when I had a fever though, so that could have impacted my enjoyment of the story, I'm not gonna lie. I was sick when I was reading this, but I didn't think it was like new or groundbreaking or anything. I think a lot of people would have a good time with it, but I just think personally David Sodergren's books don't really work for me, so I am giving this one 3 stars. Next up we have The Fervor by Makatsu. I soft DNF'd this book a few months ago. I don't remember. October? September? It might have been September. I don't really remember. But I soft DNF'd this book and I decided to retry it because I thought I just wasn't really in the mood for it, so I wanted to give it another chance. This book is about a woman and her daughter who are in a Japanese internment camp during World War II, and you have different POVs besides theirs, and it also has like a folklore aspect. It talks about Japanese spider demons a lot in there. It has a lot to do with that. I didn't hate this book. I just am not the biggest fan of historical fiction or historical horror, just because I feel like it doesn't really work for me a lot of times. So I didn't hate this story. I think I was just lacking a lot of like horror in it. It just was a lot more historical than I think I wanted it to be. So it wasn't like a bad story. I felt a little bit more invested the second time around when I kept reading it and tried again, but I didn't love it. I think I just wanted like more from it in terms of horror. Overall, it was like pretty good. I think a lot of people, especially people who like historical horror, would probably enjoy this one, but I'm giving it a 3.5. Next up we have a short story collection. This is Out There Screaming, an anthology of new black horror, edited by Jordan Peele. I was very, very, very excited for this short story collection. I just had high hopes for it. Unfortunately, I didn't love a lot of the stories in this one. I think I just expected something different when I picked it up, and this kind of focuses a little bit more on like some folklore, but like a lot of magical realism and some like sci-fi elements are really prominent throughout these stories, and those are just kind of things that I'm not a big fan of in general. So I felt like a lot of the stories just didn't hit like I wanted them to. I also felt like a lot of the stories, when I started them, I felt like I was in the middle of like an actual book. Like I had started in the middle of a book, which I understand is sometimes the case with short stories because you only have a short amount of time to tell a story, so you can't focus too much on trying to explain a lot of things, and you kind of just have to throw the reader in to the middle of stuff. But this felt like a little too in the middle, like I was losing information, like I didn't know what was going on. So I felt a little confused during a lot of these stories. I think there were only 4 or 5 that I thought were like really, really good, to the point where I would have given them like 4 stars, but I think the rest of them were a 3 or lower for me. It was just a hard collection for me to read. I think I just expected something different, honestly, and short story collections like this, where every short story is written by a different author, is very hard to do. But I do think this is a great short story collection to look back at when I'm trying to find new authors to check out. So I do like that, and I do think I would keep this one just to have it as like a reference to look into new authors and try out some of their other work. I think people will really enjoy this, but I also can see why some people won't. And I am gonna probably give this 3 stars. Next up, I read The Drowning Kind by Jennifer McMahon. This was on my 23 books for 2023, as was The Fervor, so I really wanted to get some of those done and read in November. I really enjoy Jennifer McMahon's writing style, but I have noticed that a lot of her books are hit or miss for me. I think The Winter People is by far her best book. I gave it 4.5 stars, but this one and The Children on the Hill just really didn't work for me as much. This story is about Jax. She is a social worker and she receives like missed calls from her sister, who she's kind of estranged from at this point in time, and she thinks her sister is just kind of having a manic episode, so she doesn't call her back. And the next day she finds out that her sister has drowned and she unfortunately has passed away. So Jax ends up going back to their childhood home and going through her sister's things, and she noticed that her sister was kind of looking into the history of her family and the history of their house, and weird things start occurring. I liked the idea of this one. I think there were just a lot of elements that Jennifer McMahon was trying to do that it kind of was too much. Like, I think if she had focused on just a few of those things happening in the story, it would have worked out, but all of them together was just kind of chaotic and it was just a little bit too much for me. I also thought the ending was extremely predictable. I kind of expected it to happen. I didn't see it ending any other way. It's also a very like grief heavy story. It feels more like that than anything else in my opinion, which isn't a bad thing, but I think I just wanted a different kind of story. So I didn't hate it. It was a really quick read. I like her writing style a lot. So I am going to give it 3.5 stars, but I don't think this is her best book. Next up, I read Night's Edge by Liz Curran, and I actually really enjoyed this story. I was really shocked by it. I thought it sounded good, but I didn't know if I would actually like really enjoy it, and I have seen a lot of high praise for this one, so I was kind of unsure if it was going to be the kind of story I wanted it to be. So this book is about the main character Mia, and she has a very complicated relationship with her mother Izzy, and her mother has this like insatiable hunger that can only be relieved from blood, and Mia's kind of just had to grow up extremely fast because of her mom and like her condition, and just like taking care of her and making sure that she is fed and taken care of. So it's just been a lot of pressure for Mia, and Mia runs into this woman named Jade who is a musician, and she starts wondering if her life could be different. I really liked this take on vampires. It reminded me a lot of This Delicious Death by Kayla Cottingham. Not exactly, but that book is a really unique take on cannibalism, and I felt like this one had some similarities and a different kind of take on vampires, and I felt like they kind of had a similar vibe going on, so I definitely think if you like that kind of story, you might really enjoy this one. I loved the complicated mother-daughter relationship of this one. I felt like that was a really, really big part of the story, honestly. Almost bigger than the like vampiric disease aspect. I don't know, I just really enjoyed my time with this one. It read really quickly and I felt like I was really invested in it. The only issue I had was the ending. It just felt very, here it is. So that was a little disappointing, but I'm very excited to see that there is a second book coming out next year in 2024, and I will definitely be reading that one. This one is probably a 4.5 star for me personally. Overall, I really, really enjoyed it, and I think the sequel will be very interesting to pick up. Next, we have There's No Way I'd Die First by Lisa Springer. This is a YA horror, and this is about the main character Noelle, who is a horror movie fanatic. She's obsessed with horror movies. She has this horror movie club with some friends of hers, and she's hosting this Halloween party, and it's gonna be this huge thing. Everyone that's important is invited from her school, and like everyone is coming, and it's gonna be this whole thing. She hires this clown to be at the party, and the clown ends up being like a murderous clown. This had so much potential. It had so much potential, and I didn't hate it. I know this is getting like a ton of negative reviews. I don't think it's that bad of a book, but my problem is these teenagers are wild. They're like all influencers. They're all like famous, doing like podcasts, and like they're doing wild things. Like, I don't know what 17-year-olds they are, but they are like bizarre 17-year-olds. They talk like they're 25 to like 28 instead of 17. And honestly, it's just very weird. Like, it's just a weird, they're weird characters. They're very weird. Other than that, it's just a typical slasher story. I don't feel like it did anything really like new or different or exciting or fresh. It just felt like something that I had seen or read many times. It's not bad. Again, I know a lot of people hated this one. I don't hate it, but I really don't think it's anything to write home about. I would probably give this one 3 stars. It was okay. I don't know if I wish I hadn't read it, but I do feel like it slightly wasted my time a little bit. Next, I finished the entire series of Monster. So I started this series. I'm not gonna hold up this whole series. These things are thick and they are heavy, okay? So I started this series, I think around March. I read the first volume of this. These are like the deluxe editions, so they're like bigger than normal volumes. But I started this series in March. I read the first volume and I wasn't really that impressed. I know everyone really loves this series and I wasn't that excited by it. I gave it 3.5 stars, and so I kind of had been putting this series off. I didn't want to pick it up. I didn't want to finish it. I didn't really want to read it. I didn't think I was going to like it. So I decided, because I made a promise to myself, I wasn't buying any more manga until I finished this. So I decided to bite the bullet and finish volumes 2 through 9 in November. Read the whole thing in a few days, and I have very mixed thoughts on this series. I don't quite know how to feel about it. But basically, just a very short synopsis. This is about the main character, Dr. Kenzo Tenma. He's a very renowned neurosurgeon. So he gets into this dilemma between saving the life of a young boy or saving this mayor. And because of hospital politics, his boss wants him to save the mayor because the mayor is more important, but Dr. Tenma decides to save the young boy's life because he thinks that all lives are equal, and he thinks he should operate on the young boy because he was the first one that arrived at the hospital. The decision he makes affects him negatively in work, obviously. His boss is very upset. It affects his love life, and it actually affects his future because later on, the young boy he saved becomes somewhat of a monster, if you will. Like I said, the first volume I wasn't that interested in. I will say the second volume and on got a lot better. I did like this series overall. It's like a fun mystery, thriller, crime series. I liked it a lot. There are a lot of good characters in here. I think my issues with it is there's a lot of moving parts in the series, and sometimes when you're reading it, it gets lost. Like, I don't quite know what I'm supposed to be understanding or grasping sometimes, especially towards the end. It got a little bit more complicated, and after finishing it, I don't know if all of it was necessary to the story, and it kind of frustrated me. The ending was pretty disappointing and also predictable in my opinion. I felt like there were only a few ways that the series was going to end, and it went the way that I was not really wanting it to go. So I feel like the ending was very disappointing, and again, a lot of stuff just gets lost when you're reading. There's just so much information coming at you that it gets hard to remember and pay attention to some things and remember all the details. So overall, I did enjoy this series, and I can see why it's so beloved and it's held on such a pedestal, but honestly, it's not my favorite. I don't think it's as good as some other series. In my opinion, if you're gonna go for like a cat and mouse type of story, I prefer Death Note still. I know a lot of people will probably disagree with me, but Death Note, in my opinion, is better. I still really liked this, but I think there were just some things that I didn't love about this series. Some more things that I can't go into detail about because it's spoilery that I didn't love. I've read other manga series that I've liked more, Death Note being one of them, Erased being another. Erased is incredible in my opinion if you want like a thriller. So I liked it. I'm not obsessed with it like some people. I'm not sure how to rate this. I did rate every volume individually, but as a series whole, which is usually what I do, maybe a 4 if I'm being generous, maybe more of like a 3.5 to a 4-star. I did like it, I just don't think it's like the best manga series I've ever read. We have another short story collection. This is Stranger Things Happen by Kelly Ling. This is also on my 23 for 2023. This was a bizarre short story collection. I really wanted to love it, but I feel like a lot of the stories fall into that magical realism, fantastical kind of vibe, and those just really don't work for me a lot of times. I have a hard time with that, and I also felt like a lot of these stories went over my head. I finished them and I was like, I don't know what this is about. I didn't get that at all. I feel like if you really like magical realism and fantastical kinds of stories, you'll probably like this. To me, it doesn't really read horror or like spooky or creepy or eerie or anything like that. Didn't get horror from this short story collection. Maybe because I didn't understand them. That could be me, honestly. If I didn't understand them and I missed the horror aspects, could have totally happened, but this just didn't really work for me. I wanted to love it. I didn't really love it. I'm probably giving this about 3 stars. The cover is beautiful though. I will probably keep this just for the cover because I cannot unhaul it. It's just too pretty. Next up is The Girl in 6E by A.R. Torre. Another well-loved thriller. I didn't love this. I felt like it was really bizarre, honestly. This is about the main character, Deanna, who is a cam girl, and she also never leaves her apartment. She's locked inside her apartment. She never leaves because she has this murderous tendency, these murderous fantasies, and she's afraid that if she leaves her apartment, she will murder someone. So she spends pretty much all day being a cam girl and then just stays in her apartment. Well, this little girl goes missing and she feels like this might be one of her clients. This book, it reads really fast. It's very quick. The chapters are very short. But honestly, Deanna drove me insane. I thought she was such a weird character, mainly because her fantasies, her tendencies that she's always referring to. I felt like she was trying to convince herself that she wanted to murder people. Like when she would talk about it, it didn't feel like someone who actually had murderous tendencies. It just felt like she was trying to convince herself that she wanted to murder people. I was like, are you convincing me or are you convincing yourself? Because I can't tell. It feels very fake. I just felt like it was very unnecessary to the story, honestly. I felt like it really didn't have a purpose. You could have taken it out and the story would have worked fine on its own. I thought the cam girl aspect was really cool. I liked that. If you don't like sexual content in your books, definitely don't read this one because you really get into those cam girl client situations, and I mean, it's very descriptive. It's very descriptive, like very sexually explicit. So if you do not like that kind of content in your stories, you probably won't like this. I felt like it was very predictable. There's no real mystery or thriller aspect to it, in my opinion. I felt like it was all pretty straightforward. I felt like everything was pretty in your face from the beginning. So I didn't really feel like there were any twists and turns. It was all just, yep, this is what I expected from it. I didn't hate it, but I just don't think it really worked for me like it did for everyone else. So I will be giving this one a 3-star. Next up is The Resting Place by Camilla Sten. This was also on my 23 books for 2023. And I really enjoyed this author's previous book, The Lost Village, which I know everyone hated, but I really enjoyed it. So I was really excited to get to this one. This is about the main character, Eleanor, who has face blindness, so she can't really see faces like the average person does. She can't take them in the same way. And she ends up going to her grandmother's house one night, and when she walks in, she sees that her grandmother has been murdered, and she actually sees the murderer. They come face to face. However, she can't tell anyone who it is because she didn't really see them. She doesn't know who it was, even though she looked right at them. And so months later, she finds out that she's inheriting this family home. I believe it was her grandfather's. He ended up dying there, and she had no idea it existed. So her aunt, her boyfriend, and this lawyer go up to the house, and they're kind of looking at it, taking inventory of what's there, getting it ready to sell or do whatever they want with it, you know, the stuff that happens when people pass away. And some bizarre things start happening. You get a past POV as well, and I didn't hate this. It was an interesting story. I will say it's a lot more predictable than The Lost Village was to me. I felt like this one is a very standard thriller. I feel like you kind of know what's happening really early on after you start piecing some things together. I will say the final plot twist was pretty surprising. I didn't expect it, so that was pretty cool. I think the disappointing part for me was the face blindness aspect. I thought that was going to be a bigger part of the plot, and it is important to the story because it has its purpose, but I feel like it was a little misleading because it's not really that big of a part of the story. So I think I was just expecting it to be kind of more unique, but it just felt a lot more generic. I had a good time while reading it. Like, it was fun. It was a lot more fun than half the books I read in November, so I will probably give this one 4 stars. The next one is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. This is a fictionalized story of 2 women who are the victims of Ted Bundy. It's kind of written a weird way because it is fictionalized, but there are a lot of true things inside the story because it is about a real person, Ted Bundy. I do love that he is not named. His name is nowhere in the book. The only reason you know who it is because of the facts that are given. If you're aware of a lot of Ted Bundy's crimes, you would be able to figure out, you know, who they're talking about really early on. So I did really like that aspect. I'm a big fan of fictionalized true crime, mostly because I love true crime, but I do feel like it can come off very odd. I don't like giving a lot of the attention to the perpetrators and forgetting the victims. I feel like a lot of true crime tends to make you forget who the center of the stories should be, and that is the victims and not, you know, these evil people who commit these acts. So I tend to stick with fictionalized true crime just because it feels a little less icky for me personally. That's just a personal preference. I know a lot of people love to consume true crime. I like to make sure I'm consuming it in a thoughtful manner. So I do tend to stick with a more fictionalized version, and I actually really did enjoy this. I don't think everyone will like it. One, it's written in a very unique way. It's kind of hard to get into a little bit. I won't say it's like bad writing, it's just a little different. Like the minute you start it, you're like, this is interesting. It's just a different way to write a story. I can't really explain it. It's just a very unique way of writing. It took me a lot of time to get into the story and get invested. I was interested. It's very difficult to read. At times it's very emotional to read at times, but I personally like stuff like that. So I did find this pretty enjoyable, but again, I don't think a lot of people will love it. I think it'll have to hit its target audience. So I can definitely see people just absolutely hating the way this is written. But for me personally, I really enjoyed it. I feel like it was a very tasteful way to present the story that was trying to be told, and I personally really enjoyed it. So I'm going to give this one 4 stars. The next book is Dark Water by Koji Suzuki. This is another short story collection. I just don't think me and Koji Suzuki, you know, mesh well. I don't think he's a writer for me, unfortunately. I read Ring in October and I absolutely did not like it. I was not a fan. It did not work for me at all. And I have to say this was the exact same, but I did enjoy this more than Ring. I don't think it's a bad short story collection. I just think the stories are very meh. Like, they don't come off to be horror a lot of the time. They come off to be more like mysterious, and that's about it. They're not really like scary. I feel like the first story is the one that came off more horror forward, and that one is very predictable. It was my favorite out of the bunch because it was the most horror forward, but it was easy to figure out what was going on. It was a very predictable story. I still enjoyed it. It was still an easy read, and all the stories are pretty much an easy read. They're not like too complicated, or they don't like confuse you or anything like that. It's just they're not really anything special, I guess. Every story has like an element of water involved. Obviously it's called Dark Water, so of course that makes sense. But yeah, I just wasn't that impressed with it. I was just really ready for them to end. I was just kind of ready to get through them. They didn't really like stick or make a lasting impression, but I think that's just because I'm not really a fan of Koji Suzuki and his writing. I don't really like the way he writes men. I don't like the way he really talks about women a lot in his stories. So for me personally, I'm gonna give this a 3 star, and I probably will not pick up another Koji Suzuki. And the last, but my favorite book of November was The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. So I know everyone's hyped this thriller up, and I was very nervous to read this one because it's been so hyped up. I just had a feeling I wasn't going to like it, but I was struggling in November, and I was like, I need something quick. I need something easy. I need something fun. And I decided to pick up The Housemaid, and thank God for that, because this was one of the best books I read in November, probably the best besides Night's Edge, and it was so fun. This is about the main character Millie, who gets a job as a maid for the Winchesters, who are a very rich and well put together family who seem very, very normal until they don't, and things start getting very weird. Now, I'm not saying this is the most unique thriller of all time, but I will say the way it's done is incredibly well. I know a lot of people say that this book is like a copy of some other book. I don't really know. I've never read that book. I can't say that it is a copy. I don't know if I ever will read that book, but all I can talk about is this one and talk about how I felt while I read it. The chapters are short. I was super invested. It was wild. My jaw was like dropped to the floor the whole time I was reading it. I was giggling because I was having so much fun while reading it. I was telling Justin every 5 seconds something happened because I was just like invested in this story, and it was a little predictable. I'm not gonna lie. Once things started rolling, I was like, I know where this is going. But honestly, it was done so well that I didn't even care I predicted it. I just didn't care, which is very, very hard to do for me because you know I hate predicting things. But when it's done this well, I don't care that I predicted it because it was so much fun and it was so entertaining, and it was like a beautiful breath of fresh air from all the other horrible books I had read that month. So you know what? I'm giving this 5 stars. I think it deserves it. I think it's worth the high praise. It's such a fun time, and it was a blast. I will definitely be reading more Frida McFadden because, yeah, this was awesome. Alright, my friends, that is going to do it for my November wrap up. Yeah, I had a rough November. Thank God it's done. we're into December now. Hopefully December is treating me better. Hopefully you had a good November. Go ahead and let me know what your favorite or least favorite book or both was in the comments down below. I would love to hear how your reading month went. If you agree or disagree with me on any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts as well, because it's always funny to me hearing if you agree with me or not. So definitely let me know. And yeah, I hope everyone's December is going well. We are almost in 2024. We're so close, which is crazy, but I hope everyone's having a great December and a great end to their 2023 so far. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. That way I know you enjoy my wrap-ups so I can keep doing them for you in the future. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I also have a Patreon linked in the description box. We can become friends, talk about books, horrifying books, thrilling books, romance books, manga, all that good fun stuff. And with that being said, I hope you are having a great day, night, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!